I guess I'm going to maybe I'll introduce our host, if you don't mind.
Sure, thank
Uh,
you.
Mr. Matt Mc Qeeey. Mr. Matt Mc Qeeey is a member of our team over here at Conobos. He's also the host of our DX Cafe series of things that we do. You can follow him to find out a little bit more about that. DX Cafe events. He had some really good ones with folks like Santa from Consia and Dean Barker from Optimizely. And I'm sure he's hoping to have a lot of people who will listen to this from the Sitecore leadership as well as we kind of talk about the evolution of our space. Matt also runs the Conoverse podcast and does a great job there. So loves to facilitate conversations. And so he's here to lead us through a conversation about this solution producer role. So, Mr. Mc Qeeey.
Thank you, Dennis. I'll give my little bow. So hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Sitecore Strategy Lunch. We have a phenomenal panel joining us to discuss the role of the solution producer. I'll give the quick intros because we're all going to speak, and I know we have a lot of knowledge to drop here. We have, as mentioned, Dennis Augustine, partner and CX architect at Conobos, Megan Jensen, who's a strategist at Proficient, Carlos Rodriguez, a Sitecore consultant and senior business analyst at ARC Systems, Jana Baumgartner, head of strategy, and she's worked, like many folks in Sitecore, amazingly, in the space for 10 years. And last but not least, Vaishali Dialani. She's a CX head of a fintech company, as well as Conobos's best kept secret. She's a CX analyst with us. I think she'll be able to bring some great experience already to this conversation on solution producing. I'm Matthew Mc Qeeey, as Dennis mentioned. I'm the host of DX Cafe, and as I like to call myself, a lead dabbler at Conobos, kind of work in many of the spaces. Again, solution producer, I might just call it, as this presentation put a question mark out there, the indispensable role for digital projects. It can include product ownership, project management, customer experience, CX, business analysis, BA, and coaching, a lot of coaching. Projects can sink or swim with this role, which can be the connective tissue or glue of the whole operation. A little fun, I recently binge watched, of course, a very good TV miniseries called The Offer, and it was about the making of The Godfather. The Godfather is often spoken as one of the greatest, if not the greatest film ever made. And wouldn't you know it, it almost didn't get made. It took an intrepid and hard-driving movie producer named Al Ruddy, who does whatever was needed to see it through to the finish line. There were stakeholders galore, from corporate entities like Paramount and Gulf and Western, who owned Paramount at the time, to writers, directors, actors, on-site production staff, government, distributors, theaters, and even the actual mafia. There was intense budgeting, projections, and procurement. In this pre-Zoom era, Ruddy was on a plane constantly, putting out fires, cajoling, and leading up, down, and sideways. I felt an intense connection to what it feels like a solution producer in our industry can and should provide, maybe without the mafia. Each of our projects should be treated with the care and ownership as Al Ruddy nurtured the making of The Godfather. Dennis, if you wouldn't mind, could you just show a quick clip? It'll be a lot more fun, I think, if we see a quick trailer on this, just to get us in the mood here for the discussion. Great. Thank you, Dennis. I know this looks just like all of our projects, right? Day to day. But I think it bears noting again that this ended up being arguably the greatest movie ever made. And there were still dozens, if not more, of blockers and threats of it not making it to the end and on time. I'm sure that does not sound familiar. So from this, I'd like to start with Dennis, again, partner at Conobos, on this question. He was the first person that introduced me to the role of a solution producer. Dennis, could you set the scene on how you see this crucial role in context of digital operations?
Yeah, certainly. I've worked in a lot of different areas as a developer and solution architect and BA, sometimes doing project management, sometimes calling myself a CX analyst. And I realized that in a lot of different projects, no matter what the specific siloed role might be, there are usually a few key people who just help to bring everything together. Sometimes it's that one project manager who really has the big picture of how everything needs to work and advocates to get it across the line, or it's the BA or the CX analyst, or the product owner or the executive stakeholder. But it's hardly ever kind of defined very well that this is the person who's going to make it work. And we have that in the movie industry as producer, like that clip just so well. I never realized that, Matt, until you brought it up, that The Godfather almost never got made. Well, I think we know there's so many projects that we were on that had reached bumps or maybe almost didn't get done, or even didn't even try to get done, or they needed somebody to really be that glue to bring it all together. So for me, that's what the solution producer is. It's that glue that brings all of the various parts together, and there's equal parts ambassador and negotiator and problem solver and psychologist and sociologist. So many different things involved in that. It's not really a very well-defined role, but I'm sure that all of us here at some point have actually done that. So that's what I'm hoping we can discuss here today.
That's great. And maybe I'm going to do a little bit of a round robin here. I'm going to pick some names from our panel, and you could pass it on if you don't have the answer to it. But why don't I start with Jana? As a head of strategy who's worked in Sitecore for over 10 years, when you start a project, how do you kind of figure out where you're most needed, kind of in this solution producer context, because they can kind of be different from project to project. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting, the way Dennis defined it, because he's absolutely right. Like, there are so many roles that this person could be, and who brings the project together as the glue. It's really not, what the role is defined as, but more how you fit yourself into the role. And I guess one of the things that I was thinking about is this concept of business value, right? So when I start a project, one of the top things that I have in mind is, what's the end game here? Who defines success? How is it defined? And how are we going to achieve value? Because that would be probably the number one reason why a project would end, is if business value isn't clearly defined. So to me, if that role is not fulfilled, then I will absolutely step in and try to fulfill that role, define the business value. And then a lot of other things that Dennis mentioned, the people in my career and my life that I've seen fulfill that role really well are amazing project managers. It's not about, just getting the project done, but figuring out how to hold the team together as you're getting it done. It could be a product owner, it could be a business analyst. Anyone can step into the role, but in my career, I've seen project managers do that role, amazing project managers do that role excellently.
Thank you. And I think we always hear, going back to The Godfather, we always hear the Godfather offer, right? And this almost made me think of the Godfather project. We all have these projects which are kind of tentpole projects we work on that are defining. And maybe I'll go to Carlos on this one from the business analyst point of view. It's amazing when the project lands, right? In this case, the Godfather goes out there, greatest movie, box office success. But the amount of times during a project where it feels like, oh my gosh, is this going to get done? This feels perilous. and just the role of the solution producer, of the BA, of the CX specialist, how critical that mental mindset is to kind of keep things moving in the way you can. Have you found that, Carlos?
Yeah, I think from a mentality point of view, in fulfilling that type of role, I don't look at the situation and go, how are we going to get this done? I look at the situation and go, no, it's going to get done. I just got to tap the right shoulders and move this thing forward. So, the term that came to mind is for describing what a solution producer is gap filler. Like, part of when I step into that type of role, it's one of those things where it's like I'm feeling the room. I'm trying to see where is it that we're falling short, and then not sitting back and saying, well, that's someone else's problem because that's not my immediate role. It's no, we got to fill the gap. The pieces got to connect one way or the other. And particularly with someone with a stronger technical background before I got into business analyst work, for me, that sometimes means, okay, we got developers, but they got a lot of work to do and they're following a sprint mechanism to get from point A to point B, but there's always things in the requirements that get sneaked in. It could be scope creep of some type, or they'll come up with a way to use a component that was never originally designed. But, the marketing team wants that because that's what's going to help bring the customers to their site. So in those scenarios, it's okay. I've been in situations where I'm like, okay, well, I know plenty of CSS to be dangerous. So how can I bridge this gap so the developers aren't being tapped with another ticket and another ticket and another ticket? And it needs to be part of a branch, and then it needs to be checked in, then it needs to be deployed, then it can be tested. Then we got to see if it works. Then, there's a whole methodology you got to follow through that. So from the perspective of being a gap filler, I'm like, okay, I can address this gap right here, right now, and get it out so that customers get what they need. But on the back end, I look at it as an opportunity and say, okay, how do we redesign what we're doing so that it's not me always filling in the gap? I can hand this off to the marketing team and say, hey, we could do this now. So go ahead and run with it, make it happen, and then until the next thing comes along. So, to me, that's what's important about that role. But it definitely starts with, hey, we're going to find a way to get this done. I just got to find the right shoulder to tap. Or I could take it on myself if I have the skills already.
I like that. Megan, when he talks about the kind of the connector, the gap filler, as I said earlier, the glue, the connective tissue, what do you think about that? And as a strategist, how important is it also connecting the individuals, the stakeholders?
I think it's important being the connective tissue between the individuals, but kind of being the common thread between the phases of a project. When I've filled this role, like everyone on this call, we wear a lot of different hats and we've been called a lot of different things. And as a solution architect, I think the biggest value I have brought is being kind of the common thread from beginning to end of projects. So whether it's through discovery and then through design and through build and launch, having at least one person who has been through every phase of a project so that when we run into snags in design, if I was in on the user research, you have documentation, you have, good documentation, but to say, well, remember the interview when that person said X, that matters now. And when we have to make tweaks to components during the build phase, we can, remember, remember during the design phase, we had to make this change because of this. I think it matters to have one person from the relationship standard, aspect, to have one person that knows everybody on the, client side from beginning to end, but to have one person who has been a part of every conversation and every phase of the project from beginning to end, so that decisions are made and changes are made based on, things that you've learned through the whole project. And I think it's important to have at least one human being who has been a part of all of it, so that even if information is handed off through different phases, to make decisions based on people who have, experienced and been a part of the decisions from beginning to end. I think that's really important too. And whether that's the solution producer, the solution architect, the the product owner, whoever is wearing that hat. I think it's really valuable to have at least one person walking the road from beginning to end of big projects that are multi-phase like that. I think it makes for a better outcome.
I like that. And the one word that comes to my mind when you were speaking through that is context, right? It's the person who has maybe the institutional knowledge, the context. If it's something documented 3 months into a project looks different than what was the feeling at the moment it was put together, that context can often save budget time. It also, you can't spell context without CX. So I'm going to go to Vaishali on this one. Vaishali, I know in the time we've been working together, you come in as a CX specialist, but you really have lived this solution producer. I think every one of those roles we've talked about, you've been asked to fill, and which we'll get to as well, in a composable marketplace, which now adds another kind of complexity to the mix. Maybe if you could speak a little bit to what your experience before working with us, and then maybe you're getting a look into that future maybe of the role with us, if I could say that. Could you just speak to that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. I think I agree with everyone on everything they've said. One thing that I really feel like is there is, like Dennis said, there's no defined role or defined tasks for us, but similarly, there's no defined role as well. We're called different names. We're called based on the industry we work in or based on the company we work for. It's just so different, and everyone perceives it very differently. So I think one of the challenges I face is if someone perceives a BA, they set a standard expectations from a BA, but like they bring in different skills and mindsets to that solution that no one else can. So because it's not defined, it sort of has a really open room on things and has a lot of transferable skills that you bring into the project. And I think that's a unique mindset to have. I think more awareness on, as we talk about it and create such content, it'll really help everyone understand who we really are and our journey of what we go through during these different projects and how we put things together. Having said that, I think one of the most interesting things to me, earlier was, before working with Conabus, obviously, was the fact that I used to do end-to-end because I'm working with a startup. But again, I kind of had the same expectation here, but then working with clients over here, you understand that there's a lot of resistancy towards certain things instead of change. So being able to embed change, not just from internal environment, but from external environment, and learn to balance both worlds between internal and external factors, I think has been a great learning. But also how you continue to sort of embrace that relationship and take everyone together, strong-headed in the right direction, is something that a solution producer kind of brings in. And it also involves, I think, more than just the reward. It kind of involves how the person feels, what's their motivation to even doing that project, for a matter of fact. Why are they resistant towards certain things? Why do they want to go ahead with this project? Really understanding them, the different stakeholders in the process, internally and externally, will really help get the right mindset and speak the right language and communicate better to be able to achieve our goals.
Thank you. Jane, I'll go to you. Vaishali brought up an interesting point there. Being in strategy or customer experience, for instance, you have a client who is in many ways your customer, but since we're building digital experience platforms, their customers are also the customers we're supposed to be servicing. How in your career and your experience have you navigated that balance?
Yeah, that is, a super interesting point. And I have been on the client side for quite a bit of my career. And even then, even when I was on the client side, which you would think, oh, well, that's a lot easier. Now I just have to keep the customers in mind. But even then, I managed an IT team, and I had all of the business units that, put up that were responsible for the different sites. So even then I had this concept of making our business units happy. And sometimes that might be not directly related to making the customer happy. And I can actually give a really simple example of this. I worked in the staffing and recruiting domain when I was on the client side, and for one of the biggest staffing and recruiting companies in the US. And within the business units, these people have worked their entire lives in staffing and recruiting. So they use terms like managed services and staff augmentation. And if you go to their menu on their website, those are the terms that you see. Well, if I am someone looking for a job, I don't care if it's within managed services or staff augmentation. And more importantly, I don't even know what that means, right? I just want a job. So this concept of terms that are so, easily understood within your industry may still not be understood by your customers. So figuring out how you create your information architecture, how you create your experience, all of that from your end user viewpoint, it can be a challenge. And one of the ways that I've overcome the challenge, and interestingly enough, quite a bit with Megan as well, is doing, user research and actually talking to customers, like actually talking to them, and maybe even bringing your clients along so they hear the same thing that you're hearing, to understand that maybe your customers don't think of things the same way as your client does, or their customers don't think of things the same way that your client does.
I like that a lot. Megan, I'm going to jump to you on this one. I think that I've been talking a lot about, I've read recently the book Range by David Epstein, and it's about maintaining, being a generalist more, within an industry, within your interests, than a specialist. And I think what we're talking about here with the solution producer role and all the roles that we're folding up under this, how do you stay up to date on all the pieces you need to on a daily basis? Learning, making recommendations off of that learning, strategizing. How do you stay up to date?
Oh man, that's hard, because our day job keeps us far busier than any of us really can be. This is just me personally, I try to make the most of my passive time. I probably should spend more time reading fiction and reading for fun, but I read business books and I listen to business podcasts and things like that. And so if I'm cleaning or driving and that sort of thing, I'm usually listening to like business and marketing related podcasts and books and things like that, because sometimes that's the only free time I have to absorb that kind of stuff. So I'm listening to, like, shameless plug, like Sitecore related, and like Proficient has a podcast, that sort of thing. So if I have a little free time and I'm like doing busy work, that's usually the time I have to spend absorbing that kind of stuff. So because I don't have an extra like 2 hours of my workday to set aside to like study stuff. So please, everyone, keep producing that passive content that I can absorb while I'm doing other stuff, because I don't have time to sit and read a book and read an article. I have to absorb it while I'm doing other stuff.
Yeah, we need to invent those 2 or 3 hours. That's the product, right? That we got to make. Carlos, I like what you said there. Sometimes you need a jack of all trades to see the forest through the trees. And on that front, I wanted to actually ask you, as the kind of BA designate here, how you see a jack of all trades playing out in that role, and also how you assess the difference between BA and CX, for instance.
Well, probably the way I would see it from my vantage point is that as a BA, I'm in the trenches with the others, but I'm the guy running from position to position to make sure they have their marching orders and they know what to do next. And if there's any questions, let me know and I'll run to the general and get the clarification and run back to you and things like that. In terms of the first part of your question, can you repeat that for me again? I want to make sure I understood.
Sure. Yeah, just some of the differences, BA, CX, and also just speaking to the comment you made, which I thought was really good about the jack of all trades.
Well, because that's what helps me connect the dots, right? So if I'm like all in the development area, but I don't spend a lot of time thinking about business requirements and what does that mean and what is this acceptance, how does this acceptance criteria tie what I'm doing into the larger picture, and how does in the end that meets the customers of the client I'm doing this work for, and what have you. I can get caught up in my own little bubble or world but not attach myself to the larger picture. And when you have someone who's willing to be the jack of all trades and is willing to take a step back and see the forest through the trees, I've been in a lot of conversations in that type of role where I'm like, this is why we need this. This is how this is going to connect and plug in with the rest of it. So yeah, I know it's not your favorite way of getting something done, but there's a rhyme or rhyme behind it where it may make perfect sense from a development point of view, but not perfect sense from a business requirement point of view, in which, and ultimately that's what we need to meet, right? Because that's what's paying the bills, whether we like it or not. So it's, if I'm able to see the forest to the trees, I can tap on the different trees and be like, this is why what we are doing is what we are doing, and why it's important that we get done why we get done. Because sometimes people don't quite have a clear picture of why what they're doing is so important, why they're meeting that timeline, needs to happen, so that we can move on to the next step with this particular part of the project. And I've been in a lot of conversations as I try to play that solution producer role, where I'm like, look, dude, I know would take you 5 minutes, but I needed this done 5 minutes ago because we can't move forward until these 5 minutes are put in, and that's fine, because I sometimes, like, we always hope that people understand the larger context of why they're doing what they're doing, but they're not the experts they are because they spend a great deal of time doing that. So sometimes I'm okay with the idea of, well, no, I'll make that my problem to understand why, and then explain it to you so you understand why your expertise is needed in this fashion under these circumstances.
Yeah, there's two things you said in there which made me, I love sayings, right? So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? I know it's hard to sometimes say, but I think that's important. And also, we always heard from the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, ABC, always be closing, but I like adding the D, always be connecting the dots. I'm going to go to Vaishali on this one. In terms of connecting, how critical in the solution producer role, no matter which part they're rolling up from the constituent roles we discussed, is communication?
Everything. I think I can't emphasize enough of how important it is to understand every piece of the puzzle, and then also understand what the puzzle, if you join the puzzle, what would come out of it. So I look at it as a big giant puzzle that we've been given so many pieces of, and then you're trying and testing which piece joins with, fits in with which, at which time of the phase of the project. And then as and when you start putting those pieces together, you're like, oh, this makes sense. Okay, let's go and finish this part, and then let's make this sense out of this. So I look at it that way. And I think as and when you start, everyone here, I think, agrees that the fact that, when you're loaded with so much, you're just loaded with so much information, subconsciously, you're sort of like on an autopilot mode, start categorizing them into brackets and being like, oh, let's put this in this bracket. This is where it falls into tech. This is where it falls into customer. And this is where it falls into this. And then we'll dive into those aspects separately and subcategorize them, and then break them into tasks and so on and so forth, and break them, understand each requirement. So I think it's not just about connecting those dots, but it's also about, and going back to communication, it's key because you need to learn the language of communication. We all come from different backgrounds, and those diverse stakeholders, it can get really hard understanding each other because you're speaking like jargons. You're like, oh wait, what's that? Oh wait, what's that? You're just trying to catch up on those jargons, and you might miss out on the details that they're trying to speak. So being able to speak a simple language, I think, is one takeaway I would want anyone and everyone, whenever they get on a project, to start working towards, because the more simplified and layman language we start speaking, we'll really be able to scope out requirements quicker and get things much faster in place. And that takes a lot of time because we're quite autopiloted in our own industries and our own tasks, that we don't realize that we're doing it. And only when someone comes in from a different perspective can really be that. And I think we as solution producers, or like different titles that we have here, kind of bring in that perspective into picture.
On that thread, Jaina, as somebody who leads people as well, the communication, I think Carlos brought up communication style. How important is that and the leadership quotient in general when you talk about leading different kinds of teams, different kinds of stakeholders? Was that something you had to learn? Was how much does that play into your mix?
That's a really good question. And, I'm not gonna sit here and say that I'm necessarily the best leader or that I know the answers to all these questions. I think learning in general is something you do your whole life. So, you're constantly learning. I think I learned aspects of leadership before I was a leader. I think there are people, probably even on this call who know, I mean, I will say everybody knows who was a good leader to them and who wasn't, right? And there are aspects of that you take along with you, that you're like, okay, I don't want to be like this, and I do want to be like this. I have taken like any manager that's worked for big corporate companies. I've taken a lot of leadership classes. But one of the things that stuck with me a lot from a leadership perspective is this book written by Dale Carnegie, which I'm sure a lot of you know, how to make friends or how to win friends and influence people. And there are concepts in that book it's not even about leadership, right? It's about just humanity and talking to other people and communicating and living in society. Things that I use even with raising a kid, like just it goes with anything. And I would say like that's one of the things that stuck with me a lot. But even talking to people that I've managed, or if formally or informally, in terms of understanding what I've done wrong, what I've done right, and always keep learning from that.
That's great. Everyone's done so great. I've already forgotten about Dennis, so I apologize. I'm going to go to Dennis on this one. There's a couple of things here that I like that you could speak to any one of them. I love that the Carnegie influence people aspect, because in today's world, we think of influencers as public-facing influencers on social media, but that really, you're almost an internal influencer, right? And as a leader, as a partner running a business, it's a smaller group, but it's the ultimate influencer, isn't it?
100%. I love Dana brought up that word leadership, and the leader isn't always the boss in an organization. The leader sometimes is the BA who bothers to listen to what everybody is thinking and feeling, why they might be doing that. There's no log in almost any project for, John Smith feels threatened because we're changing his application. Sue is worried about her job. There's not a line item that we're putting anywhere there, but somebody who's really practicing leadership listened to that, understood, and as Megan had said, I'd been in every meeting and kind of understood that this was important to the folks over in IT. And this executive is worried that if this project doesn't, close on time and on budget, that they'll their heads on the chopping block. Therefore, the timelines have to be sensitive to that, and it shapes things when I've been there listening to people on some of the things that just aren't on the project backlog, aren't on the decision ledger. That's where real leadership and solution producing stuff happens. In the offer clip that you showed, Matt, I was struck by how many emotional situations the producer of The Godfather had to deal with. It wasn't the mechanics of making a movie, right? It was that the mob boss felt that I could end up in jail or I might be embarrassed, and the producer was like, "Oh, I'm a family studio. Can I really put something out starring the mafia? How will that look? What will my mother think?" Was something that was in the back of their heads, right? And you have to have the sensitivity to understand, interpret those things, and somehow through whatever your role is, and your role might not be, the boss role, but whatever your role is, you have to find the ways, if you're really a solution producer, to to really find solutions to those human issues, because I think that that is ultimately, when we're dealing with large stakeholder groups, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with a group of people, first of all, and not just a code or technical problem, right? So managing of that group of people, their emotions, how they interact with each other, the emotional intelligence to get a project done, a complex project done, is, I think, something that is really typical of, yeah, that is probably the highest quality of what typifies a solution producer in my mind.
Megan, I really like something you wrote there about, if you could speak to that, about the ability to detect churn early. And it makes me think of that other saying, the canary in the coal mine, right? Could you elucidate us on that element? Because I was not thinking about that in this role. I think it's a good one.
Yeah, you know, I've been in projects before where either expectations aren't clear, or the definition of done isn't clear, or, you know, smaller teams don't really know what we're aiming for. And whether it's the engagement director or, you know, whoever is kind of at the top of the, you know, the food chain of a project group isn't able to identify that a group is going in circles, or isn't able to step in and help, or that group doesn't feel safe raising their hand and saying, we are stuck, we don't know what we're doing, we need more information. Man, you can blow a lot of time, a lot of budget. It's bad for morale, it's bad for the project. You can blow a project by not having a leader who people can come to say, look, we need to get out of this spin. We're going in circles. And if you don't have a leader that they feel like safe and comfortable and confident going to, you've got the wrong person on that project, or you've just got the wrong person. And it's unfortunate, and it makes for a really crummy project to work on. So I mean, unfortunately, I've learned from being on bad projects under bad leaders not to be that guy. Don't be that person, you know, be the person that, like, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to admit when you're stuck. It's okay to, like, say, you know, you weren't clear, you didn't give us good direction, we don't know what we're doing, because that's the fastest path to efficiency and getting out of that tailspin. You know what I mean? And making it okay to be honest when things aren't going right.
No, it's great. It's funny how much we're discussing intangibles, right? When we're talking about roles that typically are about building backlogs and requirements and all this, but so much of this, like we said, is connective tissue, connection, glue. One thing I'm really interested here to get to, and it's in the description of our talk here. I know Dennis can answer it. I'm not sure. Like, maybe we raise hands for those if they want to answer ahead of Dennis, but it has to do with the composable aspect. We know Sitecore has begun its shift to composable DXP. For those who have worked in this composable DXP for a couple of years, there's some new challenges, I think, that are arising in this solution producer role in terms of procuring, picking what is best of breed. How do we connect all this as the connectors? And I wonder if anyone would want to talk to how this role is changing in this composable world. I'll give, if you want to do a hand, otherwise I know Dennis can talk to that.
Oh, Dennis can talk about almost anything.
Preach, Dennis.
But you know, how does the role of a solution producer change in the composable world? I think it does not change as much with regards to most of what we're going to be doing, but certainly there are now potentially other vendors involved. Okay, and so I suppose there's also that aspect of things, so other technology vendors involved, and actually on the emotional intelligence side of things as well. I think I'll actually point a finger at myself and understand that certain vendors have their own emotional needs and fences that you have to watch. So I think that word to the wise there in terms of how we manage those relationships as well, understanding at the end of the day, we have to make sure that everybody knows, whether it's, as Megan says, sometimes it's necessary to hold people to account, to say we need to fix an issue. But it's important for us to do that in the context where they'll know that we are really advocating for the solution, and that we're not, even though we are on one side making it personable and personal, in that we are aware of their emotional needs, we're aware of that, we're having that, EQ, as Vishali put in the chat, that we have that EQ to understand what they need. We also do have to let them know that, with that tone, that, I'm just trying to do what we all are trying to accomplish. And you turn that back into the we, so everybody gets, everybody is involved in advocating for what's best ultimately for the solution, which is, I guess, really what that's the team game, right? If a great solution is the win, and we are the team. So we as a team are trying to win this game, and that might involve sometimes in this composable space, vendors, maybe you're treading on a little bit of each other's turf, and you have to be respectful of each other. So perhaps that's how things might change a little bit.
That's great. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just would like to add in one very interesting point, like you mentioned about the we concept, but I would also like to add in on like what is our end goal over here, and just understanding that, because the more we see it as an I, we tend to lose sight of the reward or the end goal that we are looking at, and that involves offering back to like getting the best customer experience you want to provide to your customers, to your end users, and that comes through like seamless journeys that is and can be achieved through composable intelligence. I love that word, by the way, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that more awareness on, I think when it comes to jargons, people can get like backed off or feel like that's not their domain and sort of not have their input in. So being able to sort of really bring out the whole picture in terms of what our end users are getting through this journey and taking an outside in approach would be a great way to sort of bring that more awareness and intelligence of composable in the way we're heading in our conversation, especially.
No, I like that. And one thing, as we go back to the clip we saw in the beginning with the offer, we all, well, I'm assuming we all know Francis Ford Coppola, Mario Puzo, Al Pacino, Marlon Brando. How many of us knew Al Ruddy though? And he was really the one who connected, and he had almost that servant mentality to the project. He got his due. He won an Oscar. He went on to make others, although he didn't go on to make the next Godfathers. He gave that up because he was principled about his next projects. But I found that to be a very interesting part of it. He got his due here on a mini series with Miles Teller playing him. But that is something that sometimes the glue, the connective tissue, has to take the inner value that you get from it. Maybe you're not going to be as public facing, right? Why don't we go through here and just give a couple of thoughts. I thought this has just been a great almost seminar. I've learned a lot here, and we'll do a little round, a closing word from each member, and we'll go to some of our others on the call here. Dennis, you want to start?
Yes, as soon as I get myself off mute. Yes. Engaging discussion, really enjoyed the perspectives of all of these different folks from their different roles. I gotta tell you, we deliberately picked these folks because I understood that they got what solution producer was, no matter what their title happened to have been. And I just want to encourage those who will listen in replay, especially, whatever your job is, understand. And I think that that last point about leadership and emotional intelligence, that is going to be necessary for any complicated, especially change project to succeed. In our Sitecore space right now, we have a lot of customers who are moving away from the tried and true and loved all-in-one that we all started with. I've been working with XMXP for 14 years, and now they're looking to take that away from me. It kind of makes me feel uneasy because I got to go learn new stuff. And if it's making me feel uneasy, and I love to learn new stuff, goodness, imagine the people who are at the projects and that the companies that you're working with, the IT managers who just spent, $500,000 last year and are going to have to spend another $500,000 next year to start a transition, and take into account how they're feeling, I think is probably is something that we really got to pay attention to going forward.
I love it. So we'll give a couple minutes back here, but why don't we just, in the spirit of The Godfather, we'll play the music off with the Oscar speech here. We'll give maybe 20 seconds each. Carlos, you want to go? Thanks for coming.
Sure, absolutely. This was my pleasure. The thing that comes to mind as we talk about how this moves forward is that, as this technology evolves, I try to take a step back and see what can I learn and pick up so that I can be useful on these projects in that regard, understanding that I don't have to be an expert in everything. That shouldn't be the end game for me. What's more important to me is knowing who I could tap, what resources I can go to help connect the dots together. But as I take a step back, see where my gaps might be and try to address that on my own time and see if I can become more knowledgeable in these areas and remain a jack of all trades.
Thank you. Vaishali, best picture.
That's great, Carlos. Love it. I think for me, it's just being patient and, like you said, not knowing it all and being absolutely fine with that. But throughout, taking everyone together with you and sort of creating a culture wherein everyone understands that EQ is equally important as much as the tech side is, and sort of bringing that balance in play.
Megan.
I just think that with all the new products Sitecore is coming out with, and such an evolution in the way we approach our projects, showing patience and generosity and grace to our teams as we are trying to learn so fast and so furiously is going to be really important. We are all doing our best and learning as fast as we can.
Last but not least, Jana.
I love the term composable intelligence, because it's not just about composing the product, but composing the intelligence of the different teams, the different people, and your clients, and understanding, not just what they're going through with the product changes and everything that they've come through with that, but it might be as simple as, I just dropped off my kindergartner to school for the first time today, and what that feeling is and what I'm coming to work with, after that. So composable intelligence, I love that term, and that's what I'm going to take out of this today.
Well, thank you all for coming and for allowing me to host. I'll pass it off to our MC, Dennis.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate you leading this conversation. It was really, really great. Gave us a lot of good things to think about. And, hey, Corey, you know how you do that sign-off music thing at the Sitecore lunch? Well, I stole it. Yeah. Oh. See you next month. What are they talking about? But it's out on Twitter. Yeah. Bye-bye, everyone.
I feel like having a glass of red wine now.